All right. Welcome to the amazing Isabel Foxen Duke. Isabel, thank you for being here on the Bear podcast.
Thank you so much. It's such an honor. I've certainly heard of you from even some of, my own clients who've done work with you as well. And so, I'm super excited to connect with you.
So I was just telling Isabel before we started the recording that she has this 3-part video series that's amazing. You guys should go check out. That's free on her website. I totally devoured that. Her blogs and writing style are amazing, and I really resonate with her messaging. She is for sure a Bear ambassador. We are simpatico in our messages, and she's one thing that I love about you, Isabel, is there pictures of you on your website with cake and donuts, and we definitely have that same attitude that food, stop being weird around food. Food is not the enemy. A lot of this stuff is in your mind. And one of so many brilliant points you make. One of the ones I wanted to jump off with was your take on the difference between binge eating and emotional eating.
Yes. So this is a huge thing because I think most women who identify as either emotional eaters or binge eaters or compulsive eaters or whatever the case may be, right? And I think both of our clientele or people who are reading our stuff so often identify themselves as overeaters in some capacity, right? And there's a lot of confusion, I think, between specifically emotional eating and binge eating and how these things get defined, right? I think most people they use these terms kind of, simultaneously. They use them in exchange with one another. They think binge eating is just when I eat emotionally too much, or whatever it is. And there's sort of these really fuzzy definitions of these words. And that actually can be very unhelpful and unproductive for some reasons that I'm about to explain. So I really, really try to help my clients separate these two concepts in their own mind and sort of really help them understand, emotional eating, pretty straightforward. It's just, I was lonely, I was sad, I was happy, I was whatever. I was experiencing a feeling and I was, eating for pleasure, right? Eating for non-physical hunger reasons, which sometimes is going to happen. And that's okay. We don't need to freak out about emotional eating or create rules around it. It's, can be wonderful to be conscious of those things. And there's various, just reasons to be conscious of it that have nothing to do with weight or anything like that. But ultimately, emotional eating is this really, simple thing that I think we all kind of understand as just eating over feelings. I was sad and I just wanted something sweet to soothe me. And, sometimes that might happen and it is what it is, right? Binge eating, though, on the other hand, is something that I think most dieters or most women who have, are trying to lose weight or who have weight loss goals have experienced at one point or another, right? The majority of people who have dieted have done this other thing that is what I would call binge eating, or the term I actually prefer these days is reactionary eating. Reactionary eating means, oh my gosh, I shouldn't eat the thing. I'm sitting on my hands trying not to eat the thing. I'm staring at the breadbasket. Don't eat it. Don't eat it. Don't eat it. And then all of a sudden it's I just can't hold myself back any longer. And I just dive into the breadbasket and it's a free for all. And I'm oh my gosh, I fell off the wagon. I might as well just eat the whole breadbasket and order 3 more. And then I'm going to go home and I'm going to eat a pint of peanut butter and tomorrow's day 1. Tomorrow I'll never eat bread again. Right? It's eating that by definition exists in relationship to some kind of diet, to some kind of attempt at self-control, right? It's eating that's rationalized by dieting, or it's eating that is literally just rebelling physically against a restriction that may not be physically appropriate or right for you, but you're just trying to hang on to it because of that sort of desperation to be thinner, right? So there's all sorts of reasons, there's different ways that this reactionary eating plays out, but fundamentally this reactionary eating, which is what I associate with binge eating. I mean, my worst binges, and I was a blow bottom binge eater in my day. I was calling in sick from work because I was so full from what I ate the day before. I was really just sitting and lying in the fetal position in my bed, crying because I had just eaten so much, and that kind of eating, typically speaking, is much more often a reaction to dieting, right? To a reaction to, and, feeling like I failed. I fell off the wagon. I couldn't hang on any longer. Sometimes I think about binge eating in reaction to dieting, if you think of dieting as like pulling a bow and arrow as far back as you possibly can, like hanging on tight, trying not to break my diet, trying not to break my diet, don't eat it, don't eat it, don't eat it, right? And then it's like the second you let go of the bow flies in the other direction, right? And this is where people get into concepts like, oh, I must be addicted to sugar because the second I eat sugar, I can't stop. And it's like, well, you know, if you're pulling that bow back, trying not to eat sugar, trying not to eat sugar, trying not to eat sugar, villainizing sugar, thinking, oh my God, the second I eat sugar, it's the worst thing in the world. Yeah, that bow is going to fly in the opposite direction pretty fast the second you let go, which quite frankly, for most of us is an inevitability, right? Most people are not able to maintain rigid, strict diets. I mean, this is very, very highly evidenced by all sorts of research, right?
Right.
So, yeah. So this is, you know, this is such a critical distinction for people because so many women, they get confused. They're like, oh my gosh, well, you know, I was sad and then I binged. And it's like, well, maybe you were sad and you broke your diet, which turned into a binge because you're so mad at yourself for having fallen off the wagon and, you know, diet starts tomorrow and I better get it in now while, you know, because I screwed up today. So, you know, screw it. Those kinds of things.
I have 12 more hours. I have 12 more hours.
Right, exactly. But fundamentally, you know, that falling off the wagon eating, right? That like, oh my God, trying not to eat, like trying not to eat. And then like I failed, right? And so the failure becomes this ravenous, you know, kind of like just session of I'm going to eat it all, right? That's fundamentally very different than, you know, I'm just like feeling kind of blue and, you know, kind of bored at my work. And, you know, I think I'm going to like go into the corporate kitchen, like have a spoonful of something. Those are two very different things, right? And again, I think emotional eating sometimes for many women will quickly turns into a binge because they judge themselves and they beat themselves up for, you know, eating emotionally or eating something that was off their plan or just breaking whatever rule they had in their head. But, you know, when you kind of let go of, you know, the restrictions, again, not just emotionally, but also, not just physically, but also emotionally, like really be like, you know what, like if I really want the ice cream, like it's okay to have the ice cream, like whether it's fit for whatever reason, you know, even if it's just for pleasure, right? I don't think most people are super like physically hungry for ice cream. Like it's not like a physical need that we have, but we have emotional needs around food sometimes. And like, that's okay, right? Like it's also great to be, you know, practice awareness around these things and become more, you know, conscious of how I'm feeling and how you know, food plays into that. But if I have this giant rule that says, oh my gosh, emotional eating is bad, in reality, all I'm doing is setting myself up for the binge when I inevitably fail at not eating emotionally, right? Because food is emotional, right? Everyone's going to have moments where they're eating just for pleasure. And that's really okay.
I'm with you. I totally don't understand that. When I'm talking about food, I talk about power food and pleasure food. And like, there has to be room in your life for food that has no other function than just to be pleasurable.
Yeah, totally.
Like, and you brought up and used the word wagon over and over and over again. And I've been working out with this personal trainer for probably 6 years. And I've slowly pulled him along to the light side of the work that we do. He's awesome. But he was talking about some clients. He was frustrated with some clients who kept canceling. And they said, do you know who never cancels? Do you know which client of yours never falls off the wagon? That would be me. And do you know why? Because there is no fucking wagon.
Exactly.
Like, oh my God. But
exactly.
But we have to talk about that. This concept that there's a wagon you're either on or off of.
Yeah, well, it's like, you know, if you didn't do, you know, I used to go to a trainer where I'd have like homework in between. Mm-hmm. And if I didn't do my homework, I wanted to cancel my session because I felt like such a failure. And I was so ashamed to go to my trainer and actually have to say to him, oh my God, I didn't do my homework. Right? So there's this creation of shame about like, did I succeed? Did I do it the right way? Did I fail? Right? It's the success failure model around food that is fully unproductive, right? I mean, it's like every moment is a moment that I have the pleasure and the opportunity to take care of myself and do what feels right for me, physically, emotionally, or otherwise. There's no failure to be had, right? Like there's no, you know, there's no plan to fall off of, right? And again, these plans can look all different ways, right? I think we can make a wagon out of anything. We can make Atkins and Weight Watchers a wagon, but we can also make a wagon be don't eat emotionally or don't eat too much or don't eat when you're not hungry. You know, any of these can be any kind of concept of failure around food that we have in our head. Anything that we make not okay. Oh, that's the thing I can't do. That's the thing that's not okay. That becomes this inevitable wagon that we can fall off of, right? And the truth of the matter is, and when we fall off the wagon is usually not pretty, right? Like that's when we're talking about the binge eating. That's when we're it's when that we're pulling that bow back, trying not to fall off the wagon. That's when the bow inevitably, the second we slip, ends up flying in the other direction, right? So, this concept of, did you know that if you weren't pulling that bow back, if you weren't trying to maintain some rule or trying to hang on to some specific thing that I have to do in order to feel good about myself and feel like I'm succeeding at food, if I wasn't hanging on to some rule and to some idea of what correct eating looks like, there would be no wagon to fall off of, right? You can't fall off of a wagon if there is no wagon, right? If everything is truly okay and it's really just about, what do I want right now? What do I need right now? What feels good to me right now? Anything that I choose authentically that feels right to me is fine. Right?
Yeah. And I so agree with you. And it burns my ass, because I think that part of the reason that women have such a hard time with this is because we're taught from such a young age that approval has to come externally. So, stick with the plan. Like the trainer knows more than I do. The dietitian knows more than I do. Freaking Cosmo knows more than I do. And women are taught that their bodies are dangerous and we should distrust them from such a young age. And so it's this work is bringing women back to themselves and trusting. When we talk about intuitive eating, using your intuition to guide your whole life and to make choices and to trust that those choices are what is right for you. So if your friend is paleo, or your friend is intermittent fasting, or if your friend is keto, or your friend is Weight Watchers and doing all those things, that you can confidently say yeah, I'm not doing that. I'm doing this. Yeah. The me plan.
Totally. And I always say, intuitive, I'm such an advocate of intuitive eating, and it's super helped, hugely influenced my, my career and my life personally. But I always say, intuitive eating isn't just hunger and fullness even. The way I define it is intuition, actual intuition, intuition eating, right? Actually thinking about what feels right to me. You cannot fail at that. You cannot fail at that.
And sometimes it's mint chocolate chip.
There you go.
Or movie popcorn.
Yeah. Sometimes it's a cupcake just for the fun of having a cupcake or whatever. So I think that's a big thing for anyone who's listening, who's familiar with intuitive eating or attempting intuitive eating, or, kind of playing around with, trusting our bodies. It's not even just trusting our bodies, which we are of course always told, by the outside world to distrust as women, but it's also about just trusting ourselves and our emotional needs too. It's all okay. Whatever feels right in here authentically to me is okay. And that I think is what women also have a really, really hard time trusting is just being willing to authentically be themselves in the face of that not looking like what Glamour magazine told me to eat on their fitness page or whatever.
Right. It's fascinating to me because there's always a new plan, a new fad. And it's interesting because what you were saying before about we can make a plan about anything. We can make a wagon out of anything. And I have noticed that there is a rise in labeling in terms of I'm, like you said before, a sugar addict, I'm a food addict, or with intermittent fasting, it's interesting to me how disordered thinking and eating hides in every single plan, because that's what humans will do to it. Yeah. And so what do you think, what is your opinion on the label of being a sugar addict or a food addict?
It is a really complicated question, because I think that people just really, I think people want to label themselves addicts. I think it helps people, give them like a sense of control, right? I mean, so you're talking to somebody who for many years identified that way, because it helped me feel like, okay, this is all I have to do. I just never eat sugar again. And I just like buckle down and pray to God to just never eat sugar again. And that's going to be the answer to what I consider to be my biggest problem in my life, which is that I can't make myself thin enough. I mean, really, when you really boil it down, I mean, I think that for a long time, I have a binge eating disorder. I have a binge eating problem. This is my holy grail. This is like my Everest to overcome. And if I just never eat that sugar again, like I'll like overcome this mountain, right? And it fed me this like false hope ultimately to just buy that, right? It seemed like the simple solution to something that actually is so much more complicated than that, that actually was so much more about me being uncomfortable with myself, me being unwilling to accept my natural size, my natural size today, the size that I naturally hold is not the size that Glamour magazine told me that I should have, and like just all these other issues around how I approach life, like disordered eating, right? In the grand umbrella is substantively more complicated than that. And, I could kind of go on a tangent about, sort of a lot of the faulty science behind the concept of sugar addiction. What does that mean? How are we using that term? Is it appropriate to use with food? And there are plenty of people who will talk about that on the internet. But for me, it always ended up, every attempt at abstinence ended up in a bigger and more worse binge eventually, right? So it was like every attempt at, I'm just going to buckle down even harder and I'll never eat sugar again. It really ended up for me just pulling that bow back farther and farther and farther. Just don't touch the sugar, don't touch the sugar. And every time I touched the sugar, it was like a self-fulfilling prophecy. I would just fly in the other direction, right? And it was like, the more I attempted abstinence around sugar, the worse the binges were when they came around, which was inevitable. Maybe it was a week, maybe it was a day, maybe it was a year, but it was inevitable that like one day I was going to eat sugar. Like it's very, very hard to not eat sugar for your entire life. Like this is just not realistic for most humans. And when that day would come that I would fail or slip up or in my mind relapse, it was like all hell was breaking loose. Right. And now that, I have full allowance around sugar, I have full allowance around all foods, I have full allowance around whatever behaviors, feel authentic and good to me. Right. I don't have those rebellious experiences with food anymore. Like it's all good. Like I can eat a cupcake. I can eat half a cupcake and forget about it. I mean, like literally, like it's just a non-issue. I don't walk past a bakery thinking, oh my God, walk faster. It's going to trigger me. Like I just eat the cookie or I don't eat the cookie. It's a non-issue because I don't give a shit. Excuse my language. Like I'm like, if I'm going to eat a cookie, that's fine. And as a result, like I don't have these rebellious binges. And, it is really hard with the food addiction conversation because what ends up happening is every time someone restricts sugar or tries to abstain from sugar and then they binge, it reinforces the narrative of I'm addicted to sugar because the second I ate sugar, I binged. Right. It's like, that's not necessarily, right? Just try this on for size. If this is a cycle that you're experiencing where you abstain and then binge and it's like a nightmare and then abstain and then binge and it's a nightmare, notice that this cycle may actually be starting, right? The diet binge cycle doesn't start with, it starts with dieting, right? Like right. It starts with restriction. That's why it's called the diet binge cycle. Dieting, restriction, for most people will lead to wild binges. And the more tightly you pull that bow back, the farther it's going to fly in the other direction. So it is really complicated and I'm sensitive about how I talk about it because, I know that there are so many people who are committed to this label. Like they just want it to be true. They want it to be that simple that their life will just be healed by never eating sugar again. But I think, from a statistical standpoint, just from like a scientific standpoint, the abstinence model doesn't really hold up. It doesn't work for most people in the long term. It has about the same success rates as just diet success rates, which is about 95% failure, give or take, depending on the study that you're looking at. Right. So I'm not sure that there's a lot of evidence to support an abstinence model. I know that I've done a ton of actual research in the journals and yeah, I can't support an abstinence model that isn't actually validated by science, and certainly was not validated by personal experience either.
Yeah, I mean, it's just sort of, it is, I am in full agreement with you. I have had students in my programs and clients come back to me and stumble upon some information and diagnose themselves as an addict.
Right.
And that's why this doesn't work. And what's interesting is that humans, I mean, people are drawn to diets because it, again, is like, if I just follow this plan, I'll be okay, instead of doing the heavy lifting that is much messier and, as you say, much more complicated on the internal landscape. It's like, no, actually, like, you know,
yeah,
you're called to come back to yourself, and you're going to have to keep coming back to yourself. You know, if you want to end the struggle, you got to drop the rope.
Right. Yeah, totally. So I love that phrase. I love that.
I do too. Well, Isabel, I'm going to put in the show notes how people can check out your amazing blog and your free video series. Is there anything else you want people to know about how the best way to connect with you?
You know, the video series is absolutely, like, that's where 80% of people find me. And, you know, if you're interested in any of these topics that I'm talking about, the video training series is like the most solid, free, totally free resource that I offer. So that's at stopfightingfood.com, right? Like, I used to fight with food, and you said, drop the rope, right? So my program's called stopfightingfood.com, and you can check out the video series there. Or also, you know, at isabelfoxenduke.com, you know, people really dig my blogs, and they read really easily. And I think, you know, signing up, I don't use social media that much. I'm just going to warn people. So if you're interested in hanging with me and learning about what I do, definitely sign up for my email list or my coaching email so you can get new blogs. That's really where I shine.
Nice. Well, you do shine. And thank you for putting your voice out there.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.